My name is Natalie, and at my mother's 60th birthday party, my brother Tyler kicked me in my pregnant stomach so hard I doubled over gasping for air. What he didn't know was that my husband Marcus wasn't just any ordinary man trying to protect his wife and unborn child. He was a federal judge with the power to issue warrants that would change Tyler's life forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning started like any other Saturday in late May. The Denver sun was already warming the air by 8 a.m., and I could hear Marcus in the kitchen brewing his usual strong coffee while humming something classical under his breath. At 6 months pregnant, I moved slower these days, but I felt good, strong. Our baby girl was active, pressing tiny feet against my ribs as if she was eager to join the world. I pulled on a flowing emerald dress that complemented my growing belly and slipped into comfortable flats. Today was Mom's big celebration, and despite the complicated feelings I had about family gatherings, I wanted to look nice. Marcus appeared in the doorway holding 2 mugs, steam curling upward like morning prayers. "You look radiant," he said, setting my decaf tea on the nightstand. His dark eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled, the same expression that made me fall in love with him 8 years ago during his confirmation hearing when I was working as a court reporter. Back then, I never imagined I'd marry the youngest federal judge appointed to the Byron R. White Federal Courthouse, or that his steady presence would become my anchor. "Thank you," I said, accepting the mug gratefully. "I'm nervous about today." Marcus sat on the edge of our bed, his expression growing serious. "Tyler's been texting you again?" I nodded, pulling up the messages on my phone. The latest one had arrived at 6 this morning. Another rant about how I think I'm better than everyone now that I married a judge. "Same old Tyler." Marcus read over my shoulder, his jaw tightening. "Natalie, this isn't normal sibling rivalry. Some of these messages are genuinely concerning." My brother had always been volatile, but lately his anger seemed more focused. Ever since Marcus and I announced the pregnancy 3 months ago, Tyler's resentment had intensified. He accused me of abandoning my roots, of thinking I was too good for the Rodriguez family now that I lived in Cherry Creek instead of Lakewood. The irony wasn't lost on me. Tyler lived in a custom-built house funded by the family construction business, drove a brand-new truck, and took vacations to Cabo twice a year. But somehow, I was the one who had gotten too big for my britches. "He's just jealous," I said, though even as the words left my mouth they felt insufficient. "You know how he gets around family events." Marcus stood and adjusted his tie, a subtle gesture that told me he was shifting into his professional mindset. "Promise me something. If he starts anything today, anything at all, we leave immediately. It's Mom's birthday, Marcus. I can't just bail on her. Your mother will understand. Our baby's safety comes first." He kissed my forehead, his lips warm and reassuring. "I mean it, Natalie. We leave at the first sign of trouble." I agreed, though part of me hoped it wouldn't come to that. Despite everything, Tyler was still my brother. We'd grown up sharing the same cramped bedroom in our parents' small ranch house, built secret forts in the backyard, and survived Dad's long work weeks when the construction business was struggling. There had to be some remnant of that bond left, some piece of the brother who used to defend me from neighborhood bullies. The drive to Lakewood took 30 minutes through familiar neighborhoods, where house prices dropped incrementally with each mile. By the time we pulled into my parents' driveway, the party was already in full swing. Cars lined both sides of the street, and I could hear laughter and music drifting from the backyard. Mom had rented white tents and hired a mariachi band, transforming their modest yard into something magical. "Ready?" Marcus asked, squeezing my hand. "Ready?" We walked through the side gate into controlled chaos. At least 50 people milled around tables laden with tamales, pozole, and tres leches cake. Children ran between adults' legs while teenagers clustered near the makeshift dance floor. The smell of grilled meat mixed with roses from Mom's garden, creating a sensory backdrop that immediately transported me to childhood summers. Mom spotted us first. Carmen Rodriguez at 60 was still a force of nature, her silver hair swept into an elegant updo, wearing a dress the color of deep wine. She rushed over with arms outstretched, her face glowing with the particular joy that comes from being surrounded by family. "Mija, you look beautiful!" she exclaimed, wrapping me in a careful hug that accommodated my belly. "And Marcus, so handsome as always." Marcus accepted her embrace with genuine warmth. Despite his formal profession, he'd never shown even a hint of condescension toward my working-class family. If anything, he seemed more relaxed around them than he did at judicial conferences or political fundraisers. "Happy birthday, Carmen," he said, producing a wrapped gift from his jacket pocket. 60 looks wonderful on you." She beamed and guided us toward the family table where Dad was holding court with his construction crew buddies. Roberto Rodriguez had aged more visibly than Mom, his hands permanently stained with calluses and concrete dust, despite being semi-retired. He stood when he saw us approaching, his weathered face breaking into a genuine smile. "There's my successful daughter," he said, pulling me into a hug that smelled like Old Spice and hard work. "How's my granddaughter doing?" "Kicking like she wants to be a soccer player." I laughed, placing his hand on my belly just as the baby obliged with a strong movement. Dad's eyes widened with wonder. Even after raising 3 children, he still seemed amazed by the miracle of pregnancy. "She's going to be strong like her mama." That's when I noticed Tyler watching us from across the yard. He stood near the bar setup, a beer already in his hand despite the early hour, his expression unreadable. Even from a distance, I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way he held himself like a boxer waiting for the bell. Vanessa appeared at his side, her hand touching his arm in what I recognized as a calming gesture. My sister-in-law had perfected the art of managing Tyler's moods over their 12-year marriage, though I often wondered what that constant vigilance cost her. She caught my eye and waved, her smile bright but strained. "Let me introduce you to some people," Mom said, oblivious to the undercurrents of tension. She led us around the party, proudly presenting Marcus to relatives and family friends who regarded him with a mixture of respect and curiosity. A federal judge was definitely outside their usual social circle, but Marcus handled each introduction with grace, asking about their work and remembering details from previous conversations. For the first hour, everything went smoothly. Marcus and I found ourselves at a table with my cousin Elena and her husband, discussing their kids, college plans, while I picked at a plate of food. The baby was pressing against my stomach, making it hard to eat much, but the conversation was pleasant, and I started to relax. Then Tyler approached our table. Well, he said, his voice carrying that particular edge I remembered from childhood arguments. "If it isn't the royal couple." Marcus looked up calmly, though I noticed his hand move slightly closer to mine on the table. "Hello, Tyler. How are you doing?" "Oh, I'm doing great," Tyler said, taking a long pull from his beer. "Business is booming, unlike some people who think they're too good for honest work." The comment was clearly directed at me, though Tyler's eyes remained fixed on Marcus. My cousin Elena shifted uncomfortably and excused herself to check on her children, leaving us alone with the brewing confrontation. "Tyler," I said quietly, "it's Mom's party. Can we not do this today?" "Do what?" he asked with mock innocence. "I'm just catching up with my brother-in-law, asking about his important job, where he gets to decide other people's fates from his fancy throne." Marcus remained perfectly still, but I could sense the shift in his demeanor. Years of presiding over contentious hearings had taught him how to project calm authority, even in volatile situations. "I understand you run the family construction business. That's honorable work. Your parents should be proud." It was exactly the right thing to say, acknowledging Tyler's success without taking the bait for an argument. But Tyler wasn't interested in de-escalation. "Yeah, well, some of us stayed loyal to family instead of running off to marry money and live in fancy neighborhoods." "Tyler, stop." My voice came out sharper than I intended, drawing attention from nearby tables. "You're being ridiculous." "Am I?" Tyler's eyes finally shifted to me, and I saw something dark and familiar there. The same look he used to get before childhood tantrums, a volatile mixture of hurt and rage that never ended well. "You haven't called Mom in 3 weeks. You missed Dad's doctor appointment." But you show up here in your designer dress acting like you still belong. I've been dealing with pregnancy complications, I said, my hand instinctively moving to my belly. Dr. Chang put me on modified bed rest after that bleeding scare. Always an excuse with you. Marcus's voice cut through the tension like a blade. That's enough. Tyler turned his attention back to Marcus, and I watched something shift in his expression. The resentment was still there, but now it was focused with laser intensity on my husband. Oh, the judge speaks. What are you going to do, hold me in contempt? I'm going to ask you to step away from my wife. Your wife? Tyler's laugh was ugly. She was my sister long before she was your wife. My sister who used to help Dad with estimates, who knew every worker by name, who promised she'd always be part of this family. Now look at her, sitting there like some delicate flower who can't handle a little conversation. The mariachi band had finished their set, and in the sudden quiet, our voices carried further than I would have liked. I could see Mom approaching from across the yard, her face creased with concern. Tyler, please, I said, standing slowly.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Let's go somewhere private and talk about this. Oh, now you want to talk? After months of treating us like we're beneath you? I never treated you like that. Bullshit. The profanity came out loud enough that several conversations stopped. You know what your problem is, Natalie? You think marrying a judge makes you better than the rest of us. You think your precious husband's title elevates you above your raising. Marcus stood as well, his movement deliberate and controlled. Tyler, you're upset, and that's understandable. Family dynamics change when people get married. But you're crossing a line. What line? Tyler stepped closer, and I could smell the beer on his breath. The line where I'm not allowed to call out my sister for being a fake? For pretending she's something she's not? Tyler! Mom's voice rang out as she hurried toward us, but she was still 20 feet away. You want to know what's fake? I said, my own anger finally surfacing. This whole victim act. You're jealous because Marcus and I are happy, because we're building something together. You can't stand that I found someone who treats me with respect. Respect? Tyler's face flushed red. Is that what you call it when your husband looks down on your family? When he sits there judging us with his fancy education? Marcus has never judged anyone here. Right. He's just too polite to say what he's thinking. But I see it in his eyes. The way he looks at Dad's hands, at the way we talk, at this whole party like it's some quaint ethnic experience. Marcus's voice remained steady, but I heard steel underneath. You're projecting your own insecurities, Tyler. I have nothing but respect for your family. Insecurities? Tyler laughed bitterly. That's rich coming from someone who thinks a black robe makes him God. That's enough. I stepped between them, my heart racing. Tyler, you're drunk and you're embarrassing yourself. And Mom. On her birthday. Don't you dare lecture me about embarrassing the family. You're the one who ran off and married the first man with money who paid attention to you. The words hit like a physical blow. After 8 years with Marcus, after everything we'd built together, Tyler was reducing our marriage to a transaction. I felt tears threatening and hated myself for showing weakness. Take that back, I whispered. Why? Because it's true? Because you can't handle hearing what everyone already knows? Marcus moved closer to me, his presence protective. We're leaving. Yeah, run away, Tyler called out. That's what you're good at. Running away when things get real. I turned to go, Marcus's hand gentle on my lower back, but Tyler wasn't finished. You know what I think? He said, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet yard. I think you got pregnant on purpose. Trap the judge with a baby so he can't leave when he gets tired of playing house with his little Mexican project. The words hung in the air like a curse. Conversations throughout the party had stopped completely now, and I could feel dozens of eyes on us. Mom had gone pale, her hand pressed to her chest. Dad was pushing through the crowd, his face dark with anger. Tyler Rodriguez, you apologize to your sister right now. Mom commanded, but her voice shook. Tyler ignored her. His attention was fixed on me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. That's it, isn't it? You figured out how to lock him down permanently. Get yourself knocked up so he has to keep pretending you belong in his world. Something inside me snapped. 8 years of accepting Tyler's cruelty, of making excuses for his behavior, of hoping he'd eventually accept my choices, came rushing to the surface in a wave of pure rage. "You are pathetic," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the yard. "Absolutely pathetic. You can't stand that I'm happy because you're miserable. You can't stand that Marcus loves me because nobody could love the bitter, angry man you've become." Tyler's face went white, then red. "You little bitch." "Tyler!" Dad's roar cut through the tension as he finally reached us, but it was too late. Tyler lunged forward, and for a split second I thought he was going to grab my arm or shove me. Instead, his knee came up hard and fast, connecting with my rounded belly with a force that knocked the breath completely out of me. Pain exploded through my abdomen as I doubled over, gasping. The baby, who had been active all morning, went completely still. I heard Marcus shout Tyler's name, heard Mom scream, heard the sound of bodies colliding as Dad tackled Tyler to the ground. But all of that seemed far away compared to the terrifying silence in my womb. I sank to my knees on the grass, my hands pressed protectively over my belly, trying to will my daughter to move. "Please, baby girl, please kick me. Please let me know you're okay." Marcus was beside me instantly, his hands gentle on my shoulders. "Natalie, talk to me. Where does it hurt?" "The baby," I gasped. "She's not moving. Marcus, she's not moving." His face went white, but his voice remained calm and controlled. "We're going to the hospital right now." Around us, chaos had erupted. Dad was holding Tyler on the ground while he struggled and shouted incoherent accusations. Mom was crying and apologizing over and over. Vanessa stood frozen near the bar, her hand covering her mouth in horror. Marcus helped me to my feet carefully, his arm supporting most of my weight. "Tom," he called to our neighbor who had been watching the whole scene unfold. "Can you pull your car around? We need to get to Presbyterian Hospital immediately." As Tom ran for his keys, I looked back at Tyler. Dad had hauled him upright, but Tyler's face showed no remorse. If anything, he looked satisfied, like he'd finally gotten the reaction he wanted. "This is what you get," he spat, struggling against Dad's grip. "This is what happens when you think you're better than your family." Marcus stopped walking and turned slowly to face Tyler. In that moment, my gentle husband transformed into someone I'd never seen before. The federal judge emerged fully, carrying the weight of 20 years of legal experience and the power of the United States government. "Tyler Rodriguez," Marcus said, his voice carrying absolute authority, "you just committed felony assault in front of 50 witnesses. Against a pregnant woman. My pregnant wife." Tyler's face faltered for the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his features. Marcus continued, each word deliberate and precise. "When we get back from the hospital, when I know my wife and daughter are safe, I'm going to destroy you. Not as Natalie's husband. As a federal judge who just watched you commit a violent crime against a pregnant woman." The party had gone completely silent. Even the children had stopped playing, sensing the gravity of what was happening. "You can't threaten me," Tyler said, but his voice lacked conviction. Marcus smiled, and it was the coldest expression I'd ever seen on his face. "I'm not threatening you, I'm explaining what's going to happen next. The FBI will investigate. The U.S. Attorney will prosecute. And I will use every legal resource at my disposal to ensure you face the maximum penalty under federal law." Tom's car appeared at the edge of the yard, and Marcus guided me toward it without another word. As we walked away, I heard Tyler start to shout again, but Dad's voice cut him off with a finality that brooked no argument. "You're done," Dad told his son. "You're done with this family." In the car, Marcus held my hand while Tom drove with careful urgency toward the hospital. I kept waiting for the baby to move, pressing different spots on my belly and talking to her softly. The silence inside my womb felt wrong, ominous, like the calm before a devastating storm. "She's going to be okay," Marcus murmured, though I could hear the fear underneath his reassurance. "What if she's not?" I whispered. "What if Tyler—" "Don't think like that. We're going to get you checked out, make sure everything is fine, and then we're going to handle this properly." I looked at my husband's profile as he stared out the window, his jaw set with determination. Tyler had no idea what he'd unleashed. He'd been thinking of Marcus as just another privileged outsider, someone he could intimidate or dismiss. But Marcus Williams wasn't just a federal judge. He was a man whose pregnant wife had just been assaulted, and he had the power to make Tyler pay in ways my brother couldn't even imagine. The federal courthouse had resources that local law enforcement could only dream of. Marcus had connections throughout the justice system, from FBI field agents to federal prosecutors, to other judges who would view an attack on a colleague's family as an attack on the judiciary itself. Tyler thought he'd won something by lashing out at me. Instead, he'd just declared war on one of the most powerful institutions in the American legal system. And they were going to crush him. The emergency room at Presbyterian Hospital buzzed with controlled urgency as Dr. Helen Chang attached the fetal monitor to my belly. The cool gel made me shiver, but not as much as the continued silence from my daughter. Marcus sat beside the examination bed, his hand wrapped around mine, both of us staring at the monitor screen waiting for signs of life. "There," Dr. Chang said softly, adjusting the sensor. Suddenly the room filled with the rapid whooshing sound of a heartbeat. Strong, steady, defiant. "Your baby girl is fine, Natalie. Heart rate is perfect. Movement is normal. She was probably just resting after the trauma." Relief flooded through me so completely that I started crying. Marcus leaned over and kissed my forehead, his own eyes bright with unshed tears. "She's okay," he whispered. "Our daughter is okay." Dr. Chang continued her examination, checking for signs of placental abruption or other complications. She'd been my obstetrician for the entire pregnancy, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who'd delivered hundreds of babies and seen every complication imaginable. Her calm competence had always reassured me, but today I needed more than reassurance. I needed certainty. "The impact site is already bruising," she said, gently probing my abdomen. "You're going to be sore for several days, but I don't see any signs of internal injury. However, I want to keep you for observation overnight. Any trauma to a pregnant woman at your stage requires monitoring." "Is there any chance of delayed complications?" Marcus asked, his voice carrying the precise tone he used when questioning witnesses. "There's always a small risk with any abdominal trauma, but your wife is young and healthy. The baby appears completely unaffected. We'll do another ultrasound in the morning before discharge, but I expect everything to be normal." As Dr. Chang left to arrange the overnight room, Marcus pulled out his phone and stepped into the hallway. Through the partially open door, I could hear fragments of his conversation. Federal prosecutor. Assault charges. Witness statements. The words floated past me like pieces of a puzzle I wasn't quite ready to assemble. When he returned, his expression had shifted into something I recognized from court appearances. Judge Marcus Williams was planning strategy. "I've contacted David Morrison at the U.S. Attorney's Office," he said, settling back into the chair beside my bed. "He's going to open a federal investigation into Tyler's assault." "Federal?" I asked. "Why not just local police?" "Because Tyler assaulted the wife of a federal judge, which makes it a federal crime under multiple statutes. David's already dispatched agents to interview witnesses at the party. By tomorrow morning, they'll have sworn statements from everyone who saw what happened." The efficiency of it surprised me. Less than 3 hours had passed since Tyler's knee connected with my belly, and already the machinery of federal law enforcement was moving. I'd known intellectually that Marcus wielded considerable power, but seeing it deployed on my behalf felt surreal. "What happens next?" Marcus took my hand, his thumb tracing gentle circles on my palm. "Tyler gets arrested. Probably tomorrow morning. David will seek federal charges for assault on a federal official's family member, which carries a maximum sentence of 20 years. 20 years. The number hung in the air between us like a bridge I wasn't sure I was ready to cross. Tyler was volatile, cruel, and had just attacked me while I was pregnant, but he was still my brother. 20 years felt like a lifetime. Marcus, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. He nodded, his dark eyes serious. Are you doing this because it's the right thing to do legally, or because you're angry about what Tyler did to me? The question seemed to surprise him. He was quiet for a long moment, considering his answer with the same careful deliberation he brought to judicial decisions. Both, he said finally. Yes, I'm furious that someone hurt you and threatened our daughter. But that's not why I called David. I called him because Tyler committed a serious federal crime in front of 50 witnesses. And federal crimes require federal prosecution. If I didn't report this, I'd be failing in my duty as a judge. But you have influence over how aggressively they pursue it. I do, and I'm going to ask them to pursue it very aggressively. His voice softened. Natalie, what Tyler did wasn't a moment of poor judgment or a family argument that got out of hand. He deliberately attacked a pregnant woman because he was angry about words. That's not just assault. It's a glimpse into someone capable of extreme violence when he doesn't get his way. I thought about Tyler's face in that moment before he struck me, the cold satisfaction like he'd been planning it. The way he'd shown no remorse afterward, even when Dad was holding him on the ground. He looked pleased, I said quietly. After he hit me. He looked pleased. Marcus's jaw tightened. Exactly. Someone who takes pleasure in hurting pregnant women is someone who needs to be stopped before they hurt someone else. A nurse appeared to transfer me to the overnight observation room. As they wheeled my bed through the hospital corridors, I caught glimpses of the outside world through windows. Normal people going about their Sunday evening routines, unaware that their lives weren't being dissected by federal prosecutors or that their brothers weren't facing 20-year prison sentences. The observation room was quiet and dimly lit, designed for rest and recovery. Marcus settled into the reclining chair beside my bed while I tried to process everything that had happened. 12 hours ago, my biggest concern had been whether Mom would like the birthday gift we'd brought. Now I was lying in a hospital bed while FBI agents interviewed my relatives. Do you think Mom and Dad knew? I asked. How bad Tyler had gotten. Marcus considered this. Your mother looked genuinely shocked when it happened. Your father's reaction suggests he's been worried about Tyler's behavior for a while. I remembered the way Dad had tackled Tyler so quickly, like he'd been ready for something to happen, and the finality in his voice when he told Tyler he was done with the family. Those weren't the words of a father surprised by his son's actions. They were the words of a man who'd been dreading this moment. I should call them, let them know the baby's okay. I already did. Your mother was beside herself with worry. I assured her that both you and the baby are fine, and that Tyler will face appropriate consequences for his actions. What did she say? Marcus hesitated. She asked if there was any way to resolve this within the family, without involving law enforcement. The request didn't surprise me. Mom had spent Tyler's entire life making excuses for his behavior, smoothing over his outbursts, convincing people to give him second chances. The idea that this time might be different probably felt impossible to her. What did you tell her? I told her that Tyler crossed a line that can't be uncrossed. That some actions have consequences regardless of family relationships. Sleep came in fragments throughout the night. Every time I drifted off, I'd wake with a start, my hand flying to my belly to check for movement. The baby seemed to sense my anxiety and responded with reassuring kicks that gradually calmed my fears. By morning, I felt physically better but emotionally raw. Dr. Chang arrived at 7 with the ultrasound machine, her movements efficient and confident. The screen showed our daughter in perfect detail, her tiny hands moving near her face, her heart beating strong and steady. Everything looks completely normal, Dr. Chang announced. No signs of trauma, normal fluid levels, perfect positioning. You can go home this morning. As she prepared the discharge paperwork, she pulled Marcus aside for a private conversation. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw her hand him several documents and speak with unusual gravity. When they finished, Marcus's expression had hardened into something I'd never seen before. What was that about? I asked as Dr. Chang left. Marcus held up a manila envelope thick with papers. Medical documentation of your injuries, detailed photographs of the bruising. Expert medical testimony about the potential risks to you and the baby. Everything David Morrison needs to build an airtight case. The methodical nature of it struck me. While I'd been worrying about my daughter's well-being, Marcus had been constructing a legal case that would follow Tyler for the rest of his life. Every detail documented, every witness statement recorded, every piece of evidence preserved. Dr. Chang also gave me this, Marcus said, handing me a business card. A therapist who specializes in trauma counseling for pregnant women. She thinks it might help you process what happened. I stared at the card. Dr. Amanda Foster, Ph.D. Family violence counseling. The words felt foreign, like they belonged to someone else's life. I'd never thought of myself as a victim of family violence. Tyler was my annoying brother who'd always been too rough, too loud, too angry. But looking at the purple bruise spreading across my belly, I realized that maybe my normal wasn't actually normal. The drive home took us through downtown Denver, past the federal courthouse where Marcus worked. The building looked different to me now, less like an abstract symbol of justice and more like a weapon pointed at my brother's future. Inside those walls, prosecutors were building a case that would destroy Tyler's life. "Are you having second thoughts?" Marcus asked, noticing my gaze. "I don't know, maybe. It feels so huge." It is huge. But Tyler made it huge when he decided to assault a pregnant woman. "You didn't choose this, Natalie." He did. Our house in Cherry Creek felt like a sanctuary after the hospital's sterile environment. Marcus helped me settle on the living room couch with pillows and blankets, then disappeared into his home office to make phone calls. I could hear the low murmur of his voice discussing legal strategies and federal statutes, the same tone he used for complicated cases. Around noon, my phone rang. Mom's name appeared on the screen, and I hesitated before answering. I wasn't ready for another round of family drama, but I couldn't ignore her indefinitely. "Mija, how are you feeling?" Her voice was thick with worry and what sounded like exhaustion. "Better? The baby's fine. We're both going to be okay." "Thank God. I was so scared. I didn't sleep at all last night thinking about what could have happened." "Where's Tyler?" I asked, a long pause. "He left last night. Vanessa's staying with her sister. She's very upset about everything." I wondered if Vanessa was upset about Tyler's violence or about the consequences he was about to face. After 12 years of marriage, she'd probably learned to focus on damage control rather than moral outrage. "Mom, I need to ask you something. Has Tyler ever hit anyone before? Hit Vanessa? Hit you?" Another pause, longer this time. When Mom spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. "There have been incidents. Nothing like yesterday, but yes. Sometimes, when he gets very angry, he throws things. Pushes people. Last year, he grabbed Vanessa's arm so hard it left marks." "Why didn't anyone tell me?" "What were we supposed to say? That your brother has a temper? You already knew that. And it's not like he was beating anyone, just losing control sometimes." The rationalization in her voice broke my heart. Mom had spent so many years minimizing Tyler's behavior that she'd lost track of where normal ended and abuse began. Grabbing someone hard enough to leave marks wasn't just losing control, it was assault. "Mom, what Tyler did yesterday wasn't just losing control, it was deliberate. He looked right at my pregnant belly and kicked it as hard as he could." "I know, Mija, I know. That's why your father told him to leave. But maybe if we all sit down and talk, if Tyler apologizes properly, maybe this doesn't have to involve the courts." "It's too late for that. Tyler committed a federal crime. The FBI is already investigating." "The FBI?" Mom's voice cracked. "Natalie, he's your brother. Family should handle family problems. Family should protect each other." Tyler chose to attack me instead. After we hung up, I sat staring at my phone, feeling the weight of divided loyalties. Mom was right that Tyler was my brother. We shared 32 years of history, countless memories, DNA, and childhood experiences that shaped us both. But Marcus was also right that some lines couldn't be uncrossed. The doorbell rang around 2 o'clock. Through the peephole, I saw 2 people in dark suits holding badges. FBI agents, just as Marcus had promised. I called for him, and he emerged from his office looking unsurprised by their arrival. "Mrs. Williams, I'm Special Agent Sarah Chen. And this is Special Agent Michael Torres. We're investigating the assault that occurred yesterday at your mother's birthday party. Agent Chen was younger than I'd expected, probably in her early 30s, with sharp eyes and an air of professional competence. Agent Torres was older, maybe late 40s, with the kind of weathered face that suggested years of dealing with difficult cases. Marcus invited them into our living room, where they arranged themselves with practiced efficiency. Agent Chen pulled out a digital recorder while Agent Torres opened a thick notebook. We've already interviewed several witnesses from yesterday's incident. Agent Chen began. We have consistent statements about what occurred, but we need your account of events, starting from when the confrontation began. For the next hour, I walked them through every detail I could remember. Tyler's morning texts, the tension at the party, the escalating argument, the moment he struck me. The agents asked precise questions, occasionally requesting clarification or additional details. Had your brother ever been physically violent with you before yesterday? Agent Torres asked. I thought carefully. Not directly, but he's always been aggressive. Intimidating. When we were teenagers, he used to corner me during arguments, get right in my face and yell until I backed down. Any witnesses to those incidents? Usually, just family. And they tended to treat it as normal sibling rivalry. Agent Chen made notes while Agent Torres continued questioning. What about threats? Has Tyler ever threatened you or your husband? He's made comments about Marcus. Nothing explicitly threatening, but definitely hostile. He resents that I married someone successful. We'll need copies of any text messages or emails from Tyler, particularly recent ones. I handed over my phone, and Agent Chen spent several minutes photographing Tyler's messages. Some of them looked worse in context, especially the ones questioning my loyalty to the family and suggesting that Marcus was using me. One more question. Agent Torres said as they prepared to leave. Are you aware of any other violent incidents involving your brother? Other victims who might be reluctant to come forward? The question hit me like a physical blow. I thought about Mom's admission that Tyler had grabbed Vanessa hard enough to leave marks. About the way Vanessa always seemed to be managing Tyler's moods. About incidents I might have dismissed as normal family dysfunction. You should talk to his wife, Vanessa, and maybe some of his employees. Tyler runs a construction company, and he's always had problems with authority. After the agents left, Marcus found me sitting on our back patio staring at the mountains. The Colorado sky was clear and blue, the kind of perfect spring day that usually filled me with optimism. Today it felt like mockery. How do you feel? He asked, settling into the chair beside me. Like I just signed my brother's death warrant. You didn't sign anything? You told the truth about what happened. It's the same thing. You know what 20 years in federal prison will do to someone like Tyler? Marcus was quiet for a moment. Do you know what Tyler could have done to our daughter yesterday? Dr. Chang explained the risks. Placental abruption, premature labor, brain damage from oxygen deprivation. Your brother could have killed our child, Natalie. The words hung heavy between us. I'd been so focused on the immediate relief of hearing our daughter's heartbeat that I hadn't fully processed how close we'd come to tragedy. Tyler's moment of rage could have ended our baby's life before it truly began. I know you're struggling with this, Marcus continued. Tyler is your brother, and loyalty to family is one of your best qualities. But loyalty can't extend to protecting someone who's dangerous. What if I'm wrong? What if this was just a terrible moment of poor judgment and not who Tyler really is? Then why did your father immediately tell him he was done with the family? Why did your mother admit there have been other incidents? Why did Vanessa leave him and go stay with her sister? The questions forced me to confront what I'd been avoiding. Tyler's attack hadn't been an aberration. It was an escalation of a pattern that had been building for years. I'd just been too close to see it clearly. That evening, Marcus received a call from David Morrison. They spoke for nearly an hour while I pretended to read a book, straining to catch fragments of the conversation. When Marcus finally hung up, his expression was grim. Tyler's been arrested. They picked him up at a motel in Colorado Springs about 2 hours ago. My stomach clenched. What happens now? Arraignment tomorrow morning. David's asking for no bail, arguing that Tyler poses a flight risk and a danger to witnesses. No bail means he stays in jail until trial? Potentially. Given the federal charges and the nature of the assault, it's likely the judge will agree. I tried to imagine Tyler in a federal holding cell, stripped of his freedom and a sense of control. He'd never handled confinement well, even as a child. Timeouts used to send him into screaming rages that lasted for hours. David also told me something else. Marcus said carefully. When they arrested Tyler, he made some statements. Threats, actually. What kind of threats? Against you. Against me. Against our daughter. The agents recorded everything, which means those threats will be added to the charges against him. I felt cold despite the warm evening air. What did he say? Marcus hesitated. I don't think you need to hear the specifics. But Tyler made it clear that he blames you for his arrest and that he intends to make you pay for it. The idea that Tyler was actively planning revenge while sitting in a jail cell terrified me more than his original attack. That had been impulsive, driven by anger and alcohol. But threats made from jail suggested calculation, planning, a level of malice I'd never attributed to my brother. Are we safe? Yes. Tyler's in federal custody, and he's not getting out anytime soon. But David's going to arrange for additional security measures, just as a precaution. As we prepared for bed that night, I caught myself checking the locks on our doors and windows multiple times. The house that had always felt like a safe haven now felt exposed, vulnerable. Every sound made me jump, every shadow seemed potentially threatening. Marcus noticed my anxiety and wrapped his arms around me from behind as I stood at our bedroom window. He can't hurt you anymore, he whispered against my hair. I won't let him. But as I lay awake listening to Marcus's steady breathing, I couldn't shake the feeling that Tyler's arrest was just the beginning. My brother had always been vindictive, always found ways to make people pay for crossing him. Federal prison might contain his body, but it wouldn't contain his rage. And somewhere in the back of my mind, a voice whispered that Tyler's real revenge was yet to come. The federal courthouse in downtown Denver buzzed with Monday morning activity as I walked through the metal detectors beside Marcus. Despite being married to a federal judge for 8 years, I'd rarely attended criminal proceedings. Today felt different. Today I was walking into Tyler's arraignment as the victim, not as an observer. David Morrison met us in the hallway outside courtroom 3B, his expression professionally serious but reassuring. As the assistant U.S. attorney handling Tyler's case, David carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who'd prosecuted hundreds of federal crimes. He'd worked with Marcus on several cases over the years, and their mutual respect was evident. Natalie, how are you feeling? David asked, his concern genuine. Nervous, I admitted. I've never been through anything like this. That's completely normal. Today's proceeding should be straightforward. Tyler will be formally charged, and we'll argue for him to remain in custody without bail. You don't need to say anything unless the judge specifically asks you a question, which is unlikely. Marcus placed a protective hand on my lower back as we entered the courtroom. The space was smaller than I'd expected, with wooden benches arranged in neat rows facing the judge's bench. A few reporters sat in the back, their notebooks ready. Federal crimes involving judicial families always attracted media attention. Tyler was already seated at the defendant's table beside a court-appointed attorney I didn't recognize. Seeing my brother in an orange jumpsuit and shackles sent a shock through my system. He looked smaller somehow, diminished by the institutional clothing and the weight of federal charges. When he turned to scan the courtroom, his eyes found mine immediately. The hatred in his gaze was absolute. No trace of the brother who taught me to ride a bike or helped me with algebra homework. This was someone who viewed me as an enemy to be destroyed. I instinctively moved closer to Marcus, who tensed beside me. All rise, the bailiff announced as Judge Patricia Hendricks entered the courtroom. I'd met Judge Hendricks at several judicial functions over the years. She was known for her no-nonsense approach and her particular intolerance for violence against women and children. Tyler's attorney, a harried-looking public defender named Kevin Sullivan, immediately requested a private conference with his client. The whispered conversation lasted several minutes, during which Tyler became increasingly agitated. His voice rose enough that fragments reached our seats. Federal overreach, family dispute, vindictive prosecution. Judge Hendricks called for order, and the formal arraignment began. David Morrison stood to read the charges, his voice carrying clearly through the courtroom. The United States of America versus Tyler James Rodriguez. The defendant is charged with assault on an immediate family member of a federal official, in violation of Title 18, Section 115 of the United States Code. The defendant is further charged with making threats against a federal official and his family, in violation of Title 18, Section 115. The defendant is additionally charged with interstate threatening communications, in violation of Title 18, Section 875. The list of federal statutes felt surreal. My brother, who'd spent his adult life building houses and complaining about government regulations, was now facing multiple federal felonies. Each charge carried potential decades in prison. Kevin Sullivan entered a plea of not guilty on Tyler's behalf, then immediately launched into his argument for bail. Your Honor, Mr. Rodriguez is a lifelong resident of Colorado with deep community ties. He owns and operates a successful construction business that employs 15 people. He has no prior federal convictions and poses no flight risk. David Morrison rose to respond, his preparation evident in the thick folder of documents he carried. Your Honor, the government opposes bail for several compelling reasons. First, the defendant's assault on Mrs. Williams was unprovoked, vicious, and specifically targeted her pregnancy. Second, while in federal custody, the defendant has made multiple explicit threats against Mrs. Williams, her husband, federal judge Marcus Williams, and their unborn child. Sullivan objected. Those alleged statements were made in the heat of emotion immediately following arrest. They don't represent actual intent to harm. On the contrary, David continued, the defendant's statements demonstrate a clear pattern of escalating violence and a specific intent to retaliate against the victims for cooperating with law enforcement. Additionally, our investigation has uncovered evidence that this assault was not an isolated incident. Judge Hendricks looked intrigued. Explain. David opened his folder and retrieved several documents. We've interviewed multiple witnesses who describe a long history of violent and threatening behavior by the defendant. His estranged wife, Vanessa Rodriguez, has provided a sworn statement detailing domestic violence incidents spanning several years. 3 former employees of the defendant's construction company have reported workplace violence, including physical assault and threats. I watched Tyler's face as David spoke. His lawyer was clearly hearing some of this information for the first time, based on his surprised glances at his client. Tyler himself had gone pale, his hands clenched into fists on the table. Furthermore, David continued, the defendant's construction business provides him with significant liquid assets and the potential to flee the jurisdiction. Bank records show unusual cash withdrawals in the days following the assault, suggesting preparation for flight. Sullivan scrambled to respond. Your Honor, my client made those withdrawals to pay employees. The construction business operates on thin margins and requires regular cash flow. The withdrawals totaled $47,000 over 3 days, David countered, far exceeding normal payroll requirements according to the company's own employment records. Judge Hendricks reviewed the documents David had submitted, her expression growing increasingly stern. Tyler shifted restlessly in his chair, occasionally glancing back at me with that same venomous stare. Mr. Sullivan, Judge Hendricks said finally, does your client wish to address the court regarding bail? Sullivan conferred briefly with Tyler, then shook his head. No, Your Honor. Very well. Having reviewed the charges and the arguments presented, I find that the defendant poses both a flight risk and a danger to the community, specifically to the victims in this case. Bail is denied. The defendant will remain in federal custody pending trial. The gavel came down with finality that echoed through the small courtroom. Tyler's face flushed red, and he turned fully around to stare at me. His mouth moved silently, forming words I was grateful I couldn't hear. As the bailiff led Tyler away, he managed one final outburst. This isn't over, Natalie. You think your husband's robe protects you? This isn't over. Judge Hendricks held him in contempt for the outburst, adding additional time to whatever sentence he might eventually receive. But Tyler's words hung in the air like a curse, following us out of the courtroom and into the Denver sunshine. How long until trial? I asked David as we stood on the courthouse steps. Federal calendar is backed up, but given the nature of the charges and the defendant's behavior, probably 6 to 8 months. Maybe longer if Sullivan tries to delay proceedings. 6 to 8 months felt like an eternity. 6 to 8 months of knowing Tyler was sitting in a federal holding facility, planning revenge, building resentment. 6 to 8 months of looking over my shoulder and checking locks and wondering if his threats were serious. Marcus must have sensed my anxiety because he pulled me aside while David took a phone call. "We're going to be fine," he said quietly. "Tyler's locked up, and he's not getting out. The federal prison system doesn't take kindly to threats against judges, families. He looked like he wanted to kill me in there. Probably. But wanting and being able to are very different things. Tyler's going to spend the next several months learning that federal prison isn't like county jail. It's not a place where connections or intimidation matter." That afternoon, Marcus returned to his chambers while I tried to settle into some semblance of normalcy at home. The baby was active again, her movements reassuring after the scare at the hospital. I found myself talking to her as I moved around the house, explaining what was happening in terms a fetus couldn't possibly understand, but that somehow made me feel less alone. Around 3 o'clock, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Natalie, it's Vanessa." Tyler's wife sounded exhausted, her voice hoarse like she'd been crying. I hadn't spoken to her since the night of Mom's party, though I'd heard through family channels that she'd moved out of their house and was staying with her sister. "Vanessa, how are you holding up?" "Not great, honestly. I wanted to call and apologize for what Tyler did, and to tell you something that the FBI agents asked me not to discuss with family members, but I think you need to know." My stomach tightened. "What is it?" "Tyler's been planning something for weeks. Ever since you announced the pregnancy, he's been obsessed with the idea that Marcus looks down on our family, that you think you're better than us now. Vanessa, I never thought I was better than anyone. I know that. I tried to tell him that. But Tyler's been different lately. Angrier. More paranoid. He's convinced that Marcus is going to use his influence to destroy our family somehow." "What kind of planning?" Vanessa was quiet for a long moment. "He's been researching you and Marcus. Online searches, public records, court documents. He found out about cases Marcus has presided over, looking for anything he could use against him." "Use against him how?" "I don't know exactly, but Tyler's been talking about exposing corruption, proving that Marcus isn't as clean as everyone thinks. He's been collecting newspaper clippings about judicial misconduct cases, studying how other judges have been brought down." The conversation felt surreal. I'd known Tyler resented my marriage, but the idea that he'd been conducting opposition research on my husband suggested a level of calculation I'd never attributed to him. "Did you tell the FBI agents about this?" "Yes, they took his computer and all his files. But Natalie, there's something else. Tyler's been in contact with someone, a former federal prosecutor who was disbarred for ethics violations. This guy has a grudge against the federal court system, and he's been feeding Tyler ideas about how to attack Marcus professionally." My hands started shaking. "What's his name?" "Patrick Kellerman. He was disbarred about 5 years ago for tampering with evidence in a drug case. Now he runs some kind of blog about judicial corruption." I knew that name. Patrick Kellerman had been a rising star in the U.S. Attorney's Office until he got caught fabricating evidence to secure convictions. Marcus had been involved in the judicial review that led to Kellerman's disbarment. The idea that Tyler had been working with someone who had a personal vendetta against my husband made this feel much larger and more dangerous than a family dispute. "Vanessa, why are you telling me this now?" "Because Tyler's not done. Even sitting in jail, he's not done. He's been making phone calls, talking to this Kellerman guy, planning something bigger. I thought maybe if you knew you could prepare somehow." After we hung up, I immediately called Marcus at his chambers. His assistant put me through immediately, and I could hear the concern in his voice as soon as he answered. "What's wrong?" I told him about Vanessa's call, about Tyler's research and his connection to Patrick Kellerman. Marcus was silent for a long time after I finished speaking. Marcus? Are you there? I'm here. I'm just processing what you've told me. Patrick Kellerman is bad news, Natalie. Really bad news. If Tyler's been working with him, this isn't just about Tyler anymore. What do you mean? Kellerman has been waging a personal war against the federal judiciary since his disbarment. He's tried to destroy several judges' careers through trumped-up ethics complaints and manufactured scandals. The fact that he's targeted our families specifically means this was never really about Tyler's resentment. It was about Kellerman finding a way to get to me. The pieces started falling into place with horrible clarity. Tyler's escalating anger, his research into Marcus's background, his seemingly calculated decision to assault me at a public family gathering, where there would be maximum witnesses and maximum damage to Marcus's reputation. Are you saying Tyler was being manipulated? I'm saying Tyler's resentment made him the perfect weapon for someone who wanted to damage my career. Think about it, Natalie. What better way to destroy a federal judge's reputation than to have his brother-in-law assault his pregnant wife at a family gathering? The scandal alone could have forced me to recuse myself from cases, damaged my standing with other judges, maybe even led to calls for my removal from the bench. But Tyler's in jail now. How does that help Kellerman? Because now Kellerman has a martyr. A working-class Latino man being persecuted by the federal judicial system for standing up to an arrogant judge. Kellerman's probably already writing blog posts about prosecutorial overreach and judicial privilege. Marcus was right. I could practically see the narrative taking shape. Tyler as the victim of an elitist system that protected its own. Marcus as the corrupt judge using federal resources to settle personal scores. Me as the privileged wife who'd forgotten her roots and betrayed her family. What do? We document everything. Every contact Tyler's had with Kellerman, every piece of research he conducted, every plan they made together. David Morrison needs to know about this connection immediately. Will it help Tyler's case or hurt it? Marcus paused. It'll probably hurt it. If we can prove Tyler was acting at Kellerman's direction, it shows premeditation and conspiracy. Instead of a family dispute that got out of hand, it becomes a calculated attack on the federal judiciary. I thought about Tyler sitting in his cell, probably still believing he was fighting for family honor, while actually serving as a pawn in someone else's war against the federal court system. Part of me almost felt sorry for him. Almost. That evening, David Morrison came to our house to discuss Vanessa's revelations. He spread documents across our dining room table like a detective working a complex case. Phone records, financial transactions, computer forensics reports, all painting a picture of Tyler's collaboration with Patrick Kellerman. The connection goes back almost 6 months, David explained. Kellerman first contacted Tyler through the construction company's website, posing as a potential client. But instead of discussing building projects, he started feeding Tyler information about judicial ethics and federal prosecution tactics. Was Tyler paying him? Marcus asked. No, the opposite. Kellerman was paying Tyler, small amounts at first, supposedly for consulting work, on construction projects. But the payments increased as Tyler provided more information about your family. I felt sick. My brother had literally been paid to spy on us, to gather ammunition for someone else's vendetta. Every family dinner, every casual conversation, every piece of personal information Tyler had access to had potentially been reported back to Kellerman. What kind of information was Tyler providing? David consulted his notes. Your daily routines, social commitments, financial information he could access through family conversations. He also provided details about your pregnancy, your medical appointments, your relationship dynamics. He was stalking us, I said, the realization hitting like a physical blow. Essentially, yes, and all of it was being directed by Kellerman, who was building a comprehensive profile of your vulnerabilities. Marcus's face had gone pale. David, if Kellerman has been orchestrating this for months, Tyler's assault might not have been the endgame. It might have been just the opening move. Agreed. Which is why we're treating this as an ongoing threat to judicial security, rather than an isolated domestic incident. David explained that the FBI was now investigating Kellerman for conspiracy to threaten federal officials, wire fraud, and several other charges. Tyler's cooperation, willing or unwilling, had provided them with evidence of a broader scheme to target federal judges through their family members. The good news is that this makes Tyler's case much stronger for us, David continued. Instead of arguing that he's a dangerous individual who might reoffend, we can argue that he's part of a criminal conspiracy against the federal government. That typically results in much harsher sentences. How much harsher? I asked. With conspiracy charges added to the assault charges, Tyler's looking at a minimum of 15 years, possibly life if we can prove the conspiracy endangered federal operations. Life in prison. The words echoed in my mind as David packed up his documents and left us alone with the weight of what we'd learned. Tyler, my irritating, volatile, occasionally cruel brother, was facing the possibility of dying in federal prison because he'd been stupid enough to let someone manipulate his resentment into a weapon. That night, as Marcus and I lay in bed discussing security measures and trial preparations, I found myself grieving not just for the brother I'd lost, but for the brother I'd never really had. The Tyler who'd protected me from bullies and helped me with homework had probably always been a fantasy. The real Tyler was someone who could be bought, manipulated, and turned against his own family for the right price. Do you think he knew? I asked Marcus in the darkness. Do you think Tyler understood that Kellerman was using him? Marcus was quiet for a long time. I think Tyler knew exactly what he was doing. He just convinced himself it was justified. How can you be so sure? Because choosing to hurt you required Tyler to decide that his grievances were more important than your safety and our daughter's life. Nobody makes that choice accidentally, Natalie. They make it because they want to. Outside our bedroom window, Denver slept peacefully under a blanket of stars. But somewhere in a federal holding facility, Tyler was probably lying awake too, realizing that his alliance with Patrick Kellerman had cost him everything. His freedom, his family, his future, all sacrificed for the brief satisfaction of hurting the sister who'd tried for 32 years to love him despite his cruelty. And in a few months, when his trial began, Tyler would discover exactly how much power the federal judicial system could bring to bear against those who threatened its members. Marcus had been patient and measured in his response so far, but I was beginning to understand that my husband's restraint wasn't weakness. It was the calm before a storm that would reshape Tyler's entire world. The investigation was far from over, but the endgame was becoming clear. Tyler had declared war on the wrong family, and now he was about to learn what happened when you attacked someone who wielded the full power of the United States government. 8 months had passed since Tyler's arrest, and my daughter Sophia was now 3 months old, sleeping peacefully in her carrier beside me in the courthouse hallway. She'd arrived 2 weeks early, as if eager to escape the tension that had surrounded my pregnancy. Marcus sat next to us, reviewing his notes one final time before the biggest trial of our lives began. The federal courthouse buzzed with unusual activity for a Tuesday morning. Media crews had set up outside, drawn by the unusual nature of the case. It wasn't every day that a federal judge's brother-in-law stood trial for assault and conspiracy against the judiciary. Patrick Kellerman's arrest 3 months ago had only intensified the media attention, turning what started as a family dispute into a national story about threats to judicial independence. David Morrison approached us with his trial team, looking confident but serious. Over the months of preparation, he'd become more than just a prosecutor to us. He'd been our guide through the complex federal system, explaining each step of the process and preparing us for what was to come. "How are you feeling about today?" he asked, settling into the chair across from us. "Ready," Marcus replied, though I could see the tension in his jaw. "Ready for this to be over." David nodded. Tyler's new attorney filed one last motion this morning. Gerald Hoffman is trying to get the conspiracy charges dismissed, arguing that Tyler was manipulated by Kellerman and shouldn't be held responsible for the broader scheme. Gerald Hoffman was Tyler's third attorney. The first two had withdrawn from the case after discovering the extent of Tyler's cooperation with Kellerman. Hoffman had a reputation for defending complex federal cases, but even he seemed overwhelmed by the evidence against his client. "Any chance the judge will grant the motion?" I asked. Doubtful. Judge Martinez has reviewed all the evidence of Tyler's voluntary participation, the payments, the planning meetings, the detailed reports Tyler provided about your family. It's impossible to argue he was an unwilling participant. Judge Elena Martinez had been assigned to the case specifically because of her experience with threats against federal officials. She was known for her meticulous attention to detail and her zero tolerance for violence against public servants and their families. Marcus respected her greatly, though he'd recused himself from any involvement in the proceedings. "What about Kellerman's trial?" Marcus asked. "Scheduled for next month. His attorney is already making noise about a plea deal, which tells you how strong our case is against him. But today is about Tyler, and Tyler alone." The courtroom doors opened, and we filed in with the other spectators. The space was larger than the one used for Tyler's arraignment, designed to accommodate the media attention and the number of witnesses David planned to call. I spotted several members of my family in the gallery, including Mom and Dad, who looked like they'd aged years in the past 8 months. Mom caught my eye and offered a weak smile. She'd been devastated by the revelations about Tyler's conspiracy with Kellerman, finally understanding that his attack on me wasn't a moment of poor judgment, but the culmination of months of planning. Dad had taken it even harder, blaming himself for not recognizing the signs of Tyler's descent into paranoia and greed. Tyler entered through a side door, flanked by federal marshals. Prison had changed him dramatically. He'd lost weight, his hair had started going gray, and he moved with the careful, measured steps of someone who'd learned to navigate a dangerous environment. When he saw our family in the gallery, his expression hardened into the same mask of resentment I'd seen at his arraignment. Beside him, Gerald Hoffman shuffled through papers with the frantic energy of a lawyer who knew his case was nearly hopeless. The evidence against Tyler was overwhelming, but Hoffman's job was to minimize the damage, to find some angle that might reduce his client's sentence from decades to merely years. Judge Martinez called the court to order, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd presided over hundreds of federal trials. She was a small woman in her 50s, but her presence filled the courtroom completely. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she began, "you are about to hear evidence in the case of United States versus Tyler James Rodriguez. The defendant is charged with assault on an immediate family member of a federal official, conspiracy to threaten federal officials, and interstate threatening communications. These are serious federal crimes that strike at the heart of our judicial system." David Morrison rose to deliver his opening statement, his voice calm but forceful as he outlined the government's case. He painted a picture of Tyler as someone who'd allowed his resentment to be weaponized by a disgraced former prosecutor with a vendetta against the federal judiciary. "Over the course of this trial," David said, "you will hear evidence that Tyler Rodriguez didn't simply lose his temper at a family gathering. He executed a months-long plan, developed in cooperation with Patrick Kellerman, to assault his pregnant sister in the most public and damaging way possible. This wasn't a family dispute. It was an attack on the independence of our federal courts." David walked the jury through the timeline, starting with Kellerman's initial contact with Tyler and ending with the assault at Mom's birthday party. He showed them copies of the payments Tyler had received, transcripts of their phone conversations, and detailed plans for targeting other judges, family members that had been found on Tyler's computer. "The defendant will claim he was manipulated," David continued, "that he was a victim of Patrick Kellerman's scheme. But the evidence will show that Tyler Rodriguez was a willing and eager participant who saw an opportunity to get paid for his resentment. He chose money over family. He chose violence over decency. And he chose to target a pregnant woman because he knew it would cause maximum damage to her husband's career." When David finished, Gerald Hoffman rose for the defense opening. He was a skilled attorney, and he did his best to portray Tyler as a victim of Kellerman's manipulation. But even as he spoke, I could see the jury's skepticism. The evidence was too clear, Tyler's participation too voluntary, for the manipulation defense to carry much weight. Tyler Rodriguez made a terrible mistake, Hoffman acknowledged. But he was groomed by a sophisticated con artist who exploited his legitimate concerns about his sister's marriage to orchestrate an attack on the federal judiciary. "My client is guilty of poor judgment in allowing his emotions to be manipulated. But he is not guilty of the conspiracy the government alleges. The first witness David called was Vanessa. Tyler's ex-wife had divorced him while he was in federal custody, citing irreconcilable differences and fears for her safety. She walked to the witness stand with obvious reluctance, avoiding eye contact with Tyler as she was sworn in. Mrs. Rodriguez. David began, "Can you describe your former husband's behavior in the months leading up to the assault on his sister?" Vanessa's voice was barely above a whisper as she described Tyler's obsession with Marcus and me. The late-night phone calls with Patrick Kellerman, the research into Marcus's judicial record, the increasing paranoia about being looked down upon by federal officials. Tyler became convinced that Judge Williams was using his position to investigate our family, Vanessa testified. He thought every routine interaction with government agencies was part of some conspiracy against him. When Natalie got pregnant, he saw it as proof that she'd completely abandoned her family for her husband's world. Did you ever hear Tyler and Patrick Kellerman discuss plans to harm Mrs. Williams? Hoffman objected, but Judge Martinez overruled him. Vanessa looked directly at Tyler for the first time since taking the stand. Yes. About 2 months before the party, I overheard Tyler on the phone talking about creating a public incident that would force Judge Williams to recuse himself from cases. They discussed targeting Natalie specifically because her pregnancy made her vulnerable and because attacking a pregnant woman would generate maximum outrage. Tyler's face flushed red, and he whispered furiously to his attorney. Hoffman called for a brief recess to confer with his client, but the damage was done. Vanessa's testimony had established that the assault was premeditated and specifically designed to damage Marcus's judicial career. The next witness was FBI agent Sarah Chen, who walked the jury through the evidence recovered from Tyler's computer and phone records. The trail of communication with Kellerman was extensive and damning. Text messages discussing, quote, the judge problem, emails outlining strategies for neutralizing federal interference, and detailed surveillance reports on our daily routines. Agent Chen, David asked, in your investigation, did you find evidence that Mr. Rodriguez was conducting surveillance on his sister and her husband? Yes. We recovered hundreds of photographs taken from public locations near the Williams residence, detailed logs of their comings and goings, and notes about their security measures. Mr. Rodriguez had been watching them for months. The photos were displayed on screens throughout the courtroom. Images of Marcus and me leaving for work, going to dinner, attending doctor's appointments. The systematic nature of the surveillance was chilling, turning everyday activities into evidence of Tyler's obsession. Did Mr. Rodriguez share this surveillance information with Patrick Kellerman? Yes. We have records of regular reports sent to Kellerman, including photographs and detailed schedules. Mr. Rodriguez was essentially functioning as a paid informant, providing intelligence about a federal judge and his family to someone with a known vendetta against the federal judiciary. Gerald Hoffman's cross-examination focused on trying to establish that Tyler had been manipulated into the surveillance, but Agent Chen's testimony was precise and damning. The evidence showed Tyler as an active and willing participant, not a confused victim. The prosecution's star witness was Patrick Kellerman himself. 3 months into his own federal detention, the disgraced former prosecutor had agreed to cooperate with the government in exchange for a reduced sentence. He walked into the courtroom in shackles, his once impressive presence diminished by months in federal custody. Kellerman's testimony was devastating. He described his plan to target federal judges through their family members, using Tyler as his weapon against Marcus specifically. He admitted to paying Tyler over $15,000 over 6 months, not for construction work, but for intelligence gathering and eventual violence. I identified Tyler Rodriguez as someone with existing resentment toward his brother-in-law. Kellerman testified in a flat, matter-of-fact tone. Family dynamics made him the perfect inside source. His willingness to accept payment for information told me he could be convinced to take more direct action. Did you specifically instruct Mr. Rodriguez to assault his pregnant sister? David asked. Not in those exact words, but I made it clear that a public incident involving the judge's pregnant wife would create maximum damage to his reputation and potentially force his recusal from sensitive cases. Tyler understood what I was asking for. How did you communicate this understanding? Tyler suggested targeting his sister's pregnancy himself. He said attacking a pregnant woman would generate the kind of outrage that would destroy the judge's credibility. I encouraged this line of thinking and provided additional payment to incentivize action. The courtroom was silent as Kellerman's words sank in. Tyler hadn't been manipulated into violence. He'd been the one to suggest targeting my pregnancy as the most effective way to damage Marcus's career. The calculation behind the assault was even more chilling than I'd imagined. During cross-examination, Hoffman tried to portray Kellerman as an unreliable witness with his own agenda, but the documentary evidence supported every aspect of his testimony. Phone records, payment records, and Tyler's own communications with Kellerman created an unshakable foundation for the conspiracy charges. "Mr. Kellerman," Hoffman said, "isn't it true that you're testifying against my client in exchange for a reduced sentence in your own case?" "Yes." "And isn't it possible that you're exaggerating my client's role to minimize your own responsibility?" "Number." If anything, I'm understating Tyler's enthusiasm for the plan. He was eager to hurt his sister and damage the judge. I simply provided him with a framework and financial incentive. When it came time for me to testify, I felt a familiar mix of nervousness and determination. Sophia was being watched by Marcus's mother in the courthouse childcare facility, leaving me free to focus completely on this final confrontation with Tyler. David's questions were straightforward, designed to establish the impact of Tyler's assault on me and my family. I described the physical pain, the fear for my daughter's safety, and the emotional trauma of being attacked by my own brother during what should have been a celebration. "Mrs. Williams," David asked, "prior to your mother's birthday party, were you aware that your brother had been in contact with Patrick Kellerman?" Number. I had no idea Tyler was being paid to spy on my family, or that he was planning to hurt me. How has this experience affected your relationship with your extended family? I looked toward the gallery where Mom and Dad sat, their faces etched with grief and guilt. It's destroyed relationships that took 32 years to build. My parents blame themselves for not recognizing Tyler's behavior earlier. Extended family members have taken sides. What was supposed to be the happiest time in my life, expecting my first child, became a nightmare of surveillance and violence. Gerald Hoffman's cross-examination was gentle but pointed. He tried to establish that Tyler had always been troubled, that mental health issues might have made him more susceptible to Kellerman's manipulation. But I refused to provide excuses for Tyler's choices. "Mrs. Williams," Hoffman said, "would you agree that your brother has struggled with anger management issues throughout his life?" "Tyler has always been volatile," I replied. "But volatility isn't the same as calculated cruelty. Taking money to spy on your family and then assaulting your pregnant sister isn't a mental health episode. It's a deliberate choice." But if Tyler was suffering from paranoia or other psychological issues, might that have affected his judgment? Tyler's judgment was clear enough to negotiate payment rates with Patrick Kellerman. It was clear enough to plan surveillance operations. It was clear enough to target my pregnancy specifically because he knew it would cause maximum damage. Those aren't the actions of someone with impaired judgment. They're the actions of someone who chose money and revenge over family. The final witness was Dr. Helen Chang, who testified about the medical risks Tyler's assault had posed to both me and Sophia. Her calm, professional description of the potential for placental abruption, premature labor, and fetal death reminded everyone in the courtroom how close Tyler had come to committing an even more serious crime. "In your medical opinion," David asked, "what was the most likely outcome if Mr. Rodriguez's assault had been slightly more severe? Death or severe brain damage to the fetus, and potentially life-threatening hemorrhaging for the mother. Abdominal trauma during pregnancy can have catastrophic consequences." During closing arguments, David Morrison painted Tyler as someone who'd betrayed every bond of family and decency for money and spite. He reminded the jury that Tyler's assault hadn't been a moment of poor judgment, but the culmination of months of planning and surveillance. Tyler Rodriguez didn't just attack his pregnant sister, David concluded. He attacked the independence of our federal judiciary. He allowed his resentment to be weaponized by enemies of our legal system. The defendants in this case chose money over family, violence over words, and conspiracy over conscience. The evidence demands conviction on all counts. Gerald Hoffman's closing argument was passionate, but ultimately futile. He painted Tyler as a victim of manipulation, a man whose legitimate grievances had been exploited by a sophisticated criminal. But the evidence of Tyler's willing participation was too extensive for the manipulation defense to succeed. Tyler Rodriguez made terrible choices. Hoffman acknowledged, but he was groomed and manipulated by Patrick Kellerman, a sophisticated con artist who exploited family dysfunction for his own vendetta against the federal government. While Tyler must face consequences for his actions, those consequences should reflect his role as a victim of manipulation, not as an architect of conspiracy. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. When they returned, their foreman announced guilty verdicts on all counts. Tyler showed no emotion as the verdicts were read, but I saw his shoulders slump slightly, as if he was finally understanding the magnitude of what he'd done. Judge Martinez scheduled sentencing for the following month, but she made it clear that Tyler was facing significant prison time. Federal conspiracy charges carried mandatory minimum sentences that would keep him incarcerated well into his 60s, assuming he lived that long. As the courtroom emptied, I found myself face to face with Tyler for the first time since that terrible day at Mom's party. The federal marshals were preparing to escort him back to his holding cell, but he looked directly at me one final time. "I hope it was worth it," he said quietly. For a moment, I thought he might be expressing remorse, acknowledging the price his family had paid for his choices. Then I realized he was talking about my marriage to Marcus, suggesting that our happiness had somehow justified his actions. "It was," I replied, looking him directly in the eyes. "Every day of my life with Marcus and Sophia is worth more than all the resentment you've been carrying around for 8 years. Tyler's face twisted with the same hatred I'd seen throughout the trial, and the marshals led him away without another word. As I watched my brother disappear through the courthouse doors, I felt a profound sense of closure. Not happiness, not satisfaction, but the quiet peace that comes from knowing that justice had been served. Marcus found me in the hallway, still holding Sophia, who'd slept peacefully through the verdict. His arms wrapped around us both, and for the first time in 8 months, I felt completely safe. "It's over," he said quietly. "It's over." I agreed. But even as we walked out of the federal courthouse into the Denver sunshine, I knew that Tyler's sentence would be just the beginning of our family's healing process. The scars left by betrayal and violence would take time to fade, and some relationships might never recover completely. Still, as I looked at my daughter's peaceful face and felt my husband's steady presence beside me, I knew we'd survived the worst that Tyler and his conspirators could inflict. We'd faced down threats to our safety, our marriage, and our family, and we'd emerged stronger than before. The federal justice system had done its job, protecting its officials and their families from those who would use violence to undermine the rule of law. Now it was time for us to build the life that Tyler had tried so hard to destroy. 2 years had passed since Tyler's sentencing, and the morning sun streamed through the windows of our new home in the foothills outside Denver. Sophia, now 2.5, was chasing our golden retriever Luna through the backyard, while Marcus grilled breakfast on the deck. The sound of her laughter mixed with the mountain breeze created a symphony of normalcy that still felt miraculous after everything we'd endured. I stood at the kitchen window watching my family, one hand resting on my growing belly. Our second daughter was due in 3 months, and this pregnancy had been everything the first one wasn't. Peaceful, celebrated, surrounded by love, instead of surveillance and threats. Sophia was excited about becoming a big sister, though she wasn't entirely sure what that would mean beyond getting to help pick out baby clothes. The kitchen table was covered with architectural plans for the Family Justice Center we were building in downtown Denver. After Tyler's trial, Marcus and I had decided to channel our experience into something constructive. The Natalie and Marcus Williams Center for Family Justice would provide legal services, counseling, and safe housing for families dealing with domestic violence and threats from within their own circles. "The contractor says the main building will be finished by Christmas," Marcus said, coming in from the deck with a plate of pancakes. "Perfect timing for the grand opening. Dr. Foster thinks we'll have a waiting list from day one," I replied, referring to the therapist who'd helped me process my own trauma and who would now serve as the center's clinical director. Apparently, there are more families dealing with internal threats than anyone realized. The center had grown from a simple idea into a comprehensive facility, We'd partnered with the FBI to create training programs for law enforcement on recognizing family-based threats to public officials. We'd worked with federal prosecutors to develop protocols for handling cases where family members were weaponized against government employees. Most importantly, we'd created a safe space for victims who found themselves caught between love and survival. Sophia bounded into the kitchen, her dark curls bouncing with each step. She'd inherited Marcus's eyes and my stubborn streak, creating a combination that kept us constantly entertained and occasionally exhausted. "Mama, Luna ate a butterfly," she announced gravely. "Should we call the doctor?" "I think Luna will be fine, sweetheart. Butterflies are probably like vitamins for dogs." Marcus scooped Sophia onto his lap and began cutting her pancakes into precise squares. The same methodical approach he brought to everything from judicial decisions to bedtime routines. Watching him with our daughter never failed to remind me why I'd fallen in love with him in the first place. His gentleness, his integrity, his ability to find order in chaos. The phone rang, displaying David Morrison's name. He'd become a close friend during Tyler's prosecution and now served on the advisory board for our Justice Center. His calls usually meant either good news about the center's progress or updates about the ongoing investigation into Patrick Kellerman's network. "Natalie, I have news about Tyler," David said without preamble. His appeal was denied by the 10th Circuit. The conviction and sentence are final. I felt a familiar mix of relief and sadness. Tyler had been sentenced to 23 years in federal prison, with possibility of parole after 15. His legal team had exhausted every avenue of appeal, arguing everything from ineffective counsel to prosecutorial misconduct. Nothing had worked. The evidence of his conspiracy with Kellerman had been too overwhelming, his assault on me too well documented, his threats too explicit. "How's he doing in prison?" I asked, though part of me wasn't sure I wanted to know. According to his counselor, he's finally accepting responsibility for his actions. Participating in anger management programs, working in the prison library. It's possible he's genuinely changed, though it's too early to tell. Change. The word felt strange when applied to Tyler. For 34 years, he'd been defined by his resentment, his volatility, his need to blame others for his problems. The idea that federal prison might have accomplished what decades of family intervention couldn't seemed almost impossible. Has he asked about making contact? Through his attorney, yes, he'd like to write to you and your parents. No demands, no expectations of forgiveness. Just acknowledgement of what he did and acceptance of the consequences. I looked at Sophia, who was now building elaborate structures with her pancake squares, while explaining the architectural principles to Luna. My daughter would grow up knowing she had an uncle in prison, but she'd also grow up in a world where her parents had turned trauma into purpose, where violence had been transformed into advocacy for others. "I'm not ready for that yet," I told David. "Maybe someday, but not yet." Completely understandable. The offer remains open when and if you ever change your mind. After David hung up, Marcus and I talked about Tyler while Sophia played in the living room. These conversations had become easier over time, less weighted, with immediate fear, and more focused on philosophical questions about justice, forgiveness, and family bonds. "Do you think he's really changed?" Marcus asked. "I think prison is probably the first place Tyler's ever faced real consequences for his behavior. No family members to make excuses, no money to solve problems, no ability to intimidate or manipulate. Maybe that kind of accountability does change people. And if it has, if Tyler genuinely becomes a different person?" I considered this carefully. "Then I'm glad for him. And for his potential future victims who won't exist because he learned control. But that doesn't erase what he did to us. Redemption doesn't require forgiveness from the people you hurt." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. His experience on the federal bench had taught him that people were capable of both profound evil and genuine transformation, sometimes within the same lifetime. Tyler's case had been particularly challenging because it involved family relationships that couldn't be easily severed like legal proceedings. Later that afternoon, I drove to my parents' house in Lakewood for our monthly lunch. The dynamic had shifted dramatically since Tyler's imprisonment. Mom and Dad had both entered therapy to address their roles in enabling Tyler's behavior. and our conversations now carried a depth and honesty that had been missing for years. Mom greeted me at the door with her usual enthusiasm, but I could see the toll the past 2 years had taken. She'd aged considerably, her hair now completely silver, lines of worry permanently etched around her eyes. Dad looked older too, but more at peace somehow, as if accepting Tyler's fate had lifted a burden he'd been carrying for decades. "How's our granddaughter?" Mom asked, her hands immediately going to my belly to feel for movement. "Active. I think she's going to be a soccer player like Sophia wants to be." We settled in the living room with iced tea and homemade empanadas, the same ritual we'd followed for years, but now without the underlying tension of wondering when Tyler would arrive and disrupt everything. The absence of that anxiety had allowed our relationships to deepen in ways I hadn't expected. "David Morrison called this morning," I said. Tyler's appeal was denied. Dad nodded slowly. "We knew it would be. His lawyer prepared us for that outcome months ago. How do you feel about it?" Mom and Dad exchanged a look that carried years of complicated emotions. They'd lost a son to his own choices, gained perspective on their own parenting failures, and discovered that love sometimes meant accepting consequences rather than preventing them. "Relieved," Mom said finally. "I know that sounds terrible, but I'm relieved that Tyler can't hurt anyone else. Can't hurt you, or the girls, or Marcus. Can't destroy what you've built together." "I wish things had been different," Dad added. "I wish we'd gotten Tyler help when he was younger, before the anger became so deep. But wishing doesn't change what happened. Now we focus on being the best grandparents we can be." We talked about the Justice Center, about Sophia's upcoming birthday party, about plans for when the new baby arrived. Normal family conversation, the kind we'd never been able to have when Tyler's volatility dominated every gathering. His absence had created space for relationships to heal and grow. As I drove home through familiar neighborhoods, I thought about the path that had brought us to this point. Tyler's assault had been devastating, but it had also revealed the strength of my marriage, the power of the legal system when properly deployed, and my own capacity for survival and transformation. The Justice Center was scheduled to open in 6 months, just after our second daughter's birth. We'd already received inquiries from families across the country dealing with similar situations. Federal employees whose relatives had been recruited by extremist groups. Judges whose family members had been targeted by criminal organizations. Military personnel whose spouses had been compromised by foreign agents. The common thread was always the same: love corrupted by resentment, family bonds weaponized by outside forces, and victims caught between loyalty and survival. Our center would provide a framework for addressing these threats while preserving whatever relationships could be saved. That evening, as Marcus and I tucked Sophia into bed, she asked the question that had become part of our nightly routine. "Will Uncle Tyler ever come home?" "Probably not for a very long time, sweetheart. Uncle Tyler made some very bad choices and has to stay in a special place where he can learn to make better ones." "But you still love him?" The question never got easier to answer. How do you explain to a 2-year-old that love and safety can sometimes require different choices? That forgiveness doesn't always mean reconciliation? That family bonds can survive even when family members can't be together? "I love the good parts of Uncle Tyler," I said carefully. "The brother who taught me to ride a bike and helped me with homework. But I can't be around the parts of him that hurt people. Sometimes loving someone means protecting yourself and your family from their bad choices. Like how we don't let Luna in the kitchen when she's muddy but we still love her? Exactly like that." Marcus kissed Sophia's forehead and turned on her nightlight, the routine gestures of a father who'd never take the safety of bedtime for granted. We'd learned not to assume that tomorrow would be peaceful, but we'd also learned that today's peace was enough. In our own bedroom, Marcus pulled up the security system on his tablet, checking cameras and sensors with the same methodical attention he brought to judicial review. The heightened security had become second nature after Tyler's threats, though the immediate danger had passed with his imprisonment. "Any regrets?" he asked as we settled into bed, his hand resting gently on my belly. "About Tyler's sentence? About the trial? About how everything unfolded? About any of it. All of it," I considered this carefully. I regret that Tyler chose the path he did. I regret that our daughters will grow up knowing their uncle as a cautionary tale, rather than a beloved family member. I regret that Mom and Dad had to learn about their parenting failures so late in life. But I don't regret that Tyler faced consequences for his actions. I don't regret that we fought back, instead of accepting abuse as normal family dysfunction. I don't regret that we're using our experience to help other families avoid what we went through. The baby moved strongly in response to the sound of my voice, her tiny kicks reassuring in their normalcy. This daughter would be born into a world where her father's position brought respect rather than threats, where family gatherings meant celebration rather than surveillance, where love was protected by boundaries rather than undermined by enablement. Patrick Kellerman's sentencing is next month, Marcus said. David thinks he'll get 15 to 20 years. Kellerman's network had been more extensive than anyone initially realized. During his plea negotiations, he'd revealed connections to other disgraced attorneys, criminal organizations, and even foreign agents interested in destabilizing the American judicial system. Tyler had been just one weapon in an arsenal designed to attack federal institutions through their most vulnerable points. Will that be the end of it? The end of this particular threat, yes. But people like Kellerman will always exist. There will always be someone looking for ways to weaponize family relationships against public officials. That's why the work we're doing at the center is so important. 6 months later, I stood in the lobby of the Williams Center for Family Justice, holding our newborn daughter Isabella, while Sophia cut the ribbon at the grand opening ceremony. The building was beautiful, designed to feel more like a comfortable home than an institutional facility. Soft lighting, natural materials, and plenty of space for children to play while their parents received services. The guest list included federal judges, FBI agents, prosecutors, and dozens of families who'd already benefited from our pre-opening services. David Morrison gave the keynote address, describing the center as a model for addressing emerging threats to judicial independence and public safety. Natalie and Marcus Williams transformed their own trauma into a beacon of hope for others, he told the assembled crowd. They refused to let violence define their story, choosing instead to write a new chapter focused on healing and protection. After the ceremony, I found myself in the children's playroom, watching Sophia help other kids build elaborate structures with colorful blocks. She'd inherited Marcus's methodical approach to construction, carefully planning each addition before placement. But she'd also inherited my stubborn determination, refusing to give up when a tower threatened to collapse. "She's going to be a remarkable woman," said Dr. Foster, joining me near the window. "She already is." Both of them are. Isabella slept peacefully in my arms, oblivious to the celebrations surrounding her birth and the center's opening. She'd come into the world during a blizzard that shut down most of Denver, arriving with the same quiet determination that had characterized our family's recovery from Tyler's assault. "Any word from Tyler lately?" Dr. Foster asked gently. "He sent a card when Isabella was born. Just congratulations, nothing more. I think he's finally understanding that redemption doesn't require a relationship with the people you hurt." How does that feel? Peaceful. For the first time in my adult life, I don't have to worry about Tyler's reaction to my choices. Don't have to manage his emotions or make excuses for his behavior. I can just focus on being a wife and mother and advocate. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Marcus found me in the quiet of the playroom. Sophia had fallen asleep in a pile of stuffed animals, exhausted by the excitement of being the center of attention all day. "Ready to go home?" he asked, carefully lifting Sophia into his arms. "Ready." The drive through Denver took us past the federal courthouse where Tyler's trial had taken place, past the hospital where Isabella had been born, past all the landmarks of our journey, from victims to survivors to advocates. The city lights reflected off the snow-covered mountains, creating a perfect backdrop for reflection on how far we'd traveled. "Do you think Tyler ever imagined it would end like this?" Marcus asked as we pulled into our driveway. "I think Tyler imagined I'd be the one who ended up destroyed. He probably thought attacking me would bring down your career, break up our marriage, leave me isolated and devastated. Instead, he gave us a purpose beyond ourselves. He forced us to find strength we didn't know we had. He created the circumstances that led to helping hundreds of other families. As we carried our sleeping daughters inside and settled them in their beds, I felt the profound satisfaction that comes from turning suffering into service. Tyler's assault had been meant to destroy our family, but it had ultimately made us stronger, more purposeful, more connected to something larger than our own happiness. That night, as Marcus and I stood on our bedroom balcony looking out at the stars above the Rockies, I thought about the letter Tyler had sent with Isabella's birth announcement. No demands for forgiveness, no attempts at manipulation, just a simple acknowledgement of what our family had become despite his efforts to tear it apart. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, he'd written, but I hope someday my nieces will know that their father is a good man who married a strong woman, and that they come from people who turn darkness into light. It was the first thing Tyler had ever written that sounded like genuine wisdom rather than self-pity. Maybe prison had changed him, or maybe he'd finally grown tired of carrying so much anger. Either way, his words had given me something I hadn't expected. Closure. The Williams Center for Family Justice would serve families for decades to come. Long after Tyler's release from prison, long after Kellerman's network was completely dismantled, long after our own daughters were grown and making their own choices about family, loyalty, and justice. And every family that found safety within its walls would be a testament to the simple truth that violence intended to destroy can become the foundation for something beautiful, something healing, something that makes the world a little bit safer for everyone. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.